Yeah, aloha. I just wanted to give a little history on geothermal and our involvement as Hawaiians. Geothermal was being proposed, which I think the state did experiments in the 60s, but toward the end of the 70s they were starting to get involved with a huge geothermal project on the Big Island. They were planning on producing 500 megawatts from this geothermal power plants on the Big Island and run a cable from that power plant with towers and going from island to island with this cable till they get to Oahu. This cable was supposed to carry 500 megawatts of geothermal power to Oahu. Well, at the beginning, there was a contested case. The contested case contested DLNR with allowing them the permits in the volcano area at Pua'ena, which borders the national parks. This proposed piece of land was owned by Campbell Estate. And the state, along with Campbell, was going to produce this 500 megawatts and probably be the first utility company owned by the state. So that's what the big dream was. So during this contested case, it was all these environmental groups that lived in Volcano at the time. Maybe they still do. But they were taking the DLNR to court on a contested case about the bad effects of geo, and it wasn't good for this island. But mostly I thought, as years went by, it wasn't good for their community. So during the contested case, it was poor science against rich science. So because the state was proposing geothermal, it was a go. It wasn't something that you could really fight against. But they tried to make an effort at in the Volcano Community Association. Well, during the trials, they realized that a Hawaiian component to this whole case, besides science versus science, that a Hawaiian component would be something they could use in stopping geo. So I was approached by these groups in Volcano if I could get involved in supporting Native rights or Native religious rights in this whole geothermal project, and wasn't addressed in the contested case. So I became a participant in this court case. So while we were defending Pele per se about the state's neglect to do studies on the religious impact on Hawaiians, that everything else was being studied except that was a strong component for the project to be addressed. So I would say during the last couple of weeks of the contested case, Pua'ena erupted. Pele came out in the middle of their project. Tribune Herald's newspaper front page said, "Looks like the final witness speaks," and it was the eruption of Pua'ena. Well, that scrapped the whole stage project, but they were so involved in trying to become this utility company and make money on it that they made a land swap. They moved down rift to the Waiokele Puna area, which is a NARS area, signed a permit in legislature, not permit, but legislation, to change that NARS area, Natural Area Reserve, highest status of protection, into an industrial geothermal area, so to say. So they could proceed with their project. So they moved it down rift. As it moved down rift and took away state lands, I would say the Natural Area Reserve, where all the Hawaiians and general public were using for their hunting, gathering medicine, but just the forest was part of their whole community from Volcano to Kalapana. That was the surrounding communities around Waiokele. So when they proposed it down there, I went, Pele Defense Fund had to organize and become an organization. You couldn't do it as an individual, so we had to become a bona fide 501c3 so we could make our claims with more support, finance, as well as people. That we took on the case again in Waiokele and arguing with the state that in that swap, you swapped our rights away to this natural area reserve, the forest. And now we would be owning with the swap. Pu'o would be the people's land, the state land, and Waiokele became private lands to Campbell Estate. So that's what the state did. In our litigation, we realized that the Sierra Club and Audubon and Nature Conservancy, all these groups that were part of the argument in Volcano Community Association didn't come down rift. So I thought that, and which I think they signed off on not pursuing geothermal development down rift because it's not in their backyard anymore. So much for environmental people being supportive of the environment and the natives that came with the environment. So now we're down at Waiokele fighting this case on gathering rights, which the state ignored with the land swap. So during that whole time in litigation, there were over 400 people arrested in that whole process, the largest arrest in Hawaiian history on people protesting a development. So we're down there by ourselves, just fighting for gathering rights and hunting rights of Native Hawaiians and religious rights. So we end up prevailing without the environmental people's support. We end up winning in court that the state was negligent in not allowing us to gather or taking away our rights by swapping these lands and giving public lands to the private. So during that whole time, we were being consistent about fighting our rights. But as I was saying at the beginning, the first strike on geothermal was at Pu'o. So they struck out at Pu'o and came down to Waiokele, the state, in proposing geothermal development there. So during the arrest and all the protests and our lawsuit, they continued drilling. So what they ended up doing was drilling a mile down and angle drilling because they couldn't find any resource. So for maybe 6 months to almost a year of drilling, they found no resource. So that whole project had to be abandoned in Waiokele. In the meantime, PGV was ORMAT before PGV, they had that small little 20 megawatt geothermal. So in fighting, we had to pick and choose. So we picked the big one at 500 megawatts and allowed a little one to continue. So we took the big one. And it took us years to fight that. Our court case was almost 20 years in court. But the project was stopped because of no resource. So then everything started to shift down, and us winning our lawsuit, the whole idea of GEO now went down to ORMAT, which is now PGV. So strike two at Waiokele with the state and the proposed GEO. We're still defending Pele's rights and our religious rights. The state didn't prove or show any impact with the EIS on Native beliefs and Native rights on religion. It didn't show an impact on what happens to races of people when you alter theologies of their beliefs. We believe it was legitimate enough to be in an EIS, but that was never addressed. So then it's PGV left, and PGV's problem with GEO ignoring our rights was a continued pollution and threatening of the communities that surround it. There have been constant blowouts with metal fatigue. Metal fatigue, I think it's corrosive steam. At that time, they were doing abatement, letting the rubbish out in the air. Then they moved into more progressive ways of getting rid of waste. So they did reinjection. They pumped all the waste instead of out in the air. They pumped it down in the holes that they were doing geo that went dry. Geothermal is not a renewable resource. It has about a 10-15 year lifespan in each hole. So the dried up holes is where they start to do reinjection. Blow the waste down in the holes that will end up being dry after years of use. So there was a big groundwater problem that never got looked at in reinjection. Then came in the new technology, or maybe it was old, but for a while it was new in fracking. That now geothermal steam wasn't important. It was drilling for hot rock. And we can always make our steam if we found hot rock. And they started doing fracking at PGV in their own way. I'm sure they deny, but that was what they were doing, trying to keep the heat when they know it was only 10 to 15 years each puka. So during that time, like I said, they poisoned a lot of people. You got a lot of problems. There were blowouts. There were malfunctions of their equipment. People got sick in the neighborhood. Some people died, from what I heard, and so was animals. So it was a bad thing that the community had to deal with. And the sad thing is that the community was there before geothermal development. It's such a push on industry for utilities that they really don't care who lives by it. It's all about how much money we make off of it. So that was the problem of what PGV now had. And of course, strike 3 just happened. And that's Tūtū Pele surfacing again, second time around, and just covered everything up. She also covered part of Waiokele Opuna, which almost half of it is covered. And that went to Poa town about 4 or 5 years ago. And now recently it's Leilani Estates, and right after PGV. In fact, I think it shut down PGV. So it makes you wonder about this whole idea of pushing industry, polluting industry on community people. And of course, the neglect of our spiritual beliefs. You know, it's no different than everybody else believing in the gods. We have the same right to believe in ours. The neglect of our rights and our position as a race of Hawaiian, race of people in Hawaii, to be ignored. I didn't know the First Amendment said ignore Hawaiian rights or Hawaiian beliefs. I thought it meant all beliefs. So we stood on those things and still stand on it today. So the geothermal power plant now is a history. It'll always be history. So that was just a brief, you know, the $500 million that the state had proposed in the EIS was going to be a bond that Danny Noy was going to definitely get approved in Washington to borrow $3 billion for that project. They would have to build a ship, they would have to make the cable, they would have to put power lines, they would run from channel to channel. $3 billion was proposed for this whole project. It's always going to come out of the taxpayer. So the bonds that they were going to borrow would have to be paid back. And like I see today, that payback would have been inherited by our grandchildren to pay back the $3 billion that the state was going to borrow for this fake project. I mean, that was just money driven and personal interest. So I would say that a lot of things we've done in the process, challenging the health department on issuing permits without any standards for admissions. I mean, that's what the state was doing, giving a lot of permits with nothing for the people's protection. So the whole process in fighting this geothermal was learning about all the inside, internal government bullshit, crap that they were pulling on taxpayers who's busy working and leaving trust into our government to do the right thing. So I think we've saved a lot of money for the taxpayer in the future. And the people involved with that are still around today. I know that they feel guilty. They should be feeling guilty about what they tried to pull and what didn't happen. And activists who come out against that kind of saved their okole because they never got it and the people didn't get stuck with the bill. But that's just because of our persistence in being what we are from where we are. I mean, there's no extra Hawaii nowhere and we're it. So you got to reach up and do the best you can for what you are and what you represent. If you're talking about the future, then Give them something real to represent, and stop this negligence by this so-called state. Realize it came around in '59. We were here with our resources and our traditions way before statehood, and we should have been accepted in statehood as part of the environment that we come with. So land use and lands per se that the state uses ignores our rights that came with these lands. And it's sad that we have to pay taxes as Hawaiians and not get the representation that we should get as taxpayers. In fact, if you think about ceded lands that got the state inherited in '59, that got ceded to them, gosh, all these airports and harbors and all state lands that generate a lot of economy for the state, Hawaiians don't get anything out of it. What representations we get, you can see that there's no results. So it's the sad thing about being stuck with a system that occupied our so-called lives and are not been up about it. So that's the reason I think that we did a lot of the geo, and there was a lot of people involved. You know, the people were labeled hippies in Puna, who used the forest as hippies and marijuana growers. They seem to be the more real people to me than a lot of the environmental groups that say they love the Aina. But they love the Aina if there's no Hawaiians in it. And I've learned that. And I've seen that. And I don't see them advocate for Hawaiians and their rights when they stand up for a snail or a fly or a bird. I mean, we don't even count in that protection that came with it. Even named all these species that they all so-called defend. So I see the environmental groups as not hugging people, they'd rather hug trees. And the sad part about all of that is that we came with the trees. We came with everything here, and we're not being acknowledged of that. So when you don't acknowledge the race of people that comes with their land, then you're not ignoring, you're ignoring them and their practice, their well-beings, their hundreds of years of traditions. It's just sad that in this time and era we haven't learned from the mistakes of the past and not correct them. We're compounding the problem, and it's going to be tougher for future generations. And they talk about the kids and how much they should be part of the environment, but you know, it's all us adults that are making it hard for them. Yeah, we like a good environment for them in the future, but it's our fault for not preparing the land for them or taking care of the land for them. So yeah, geothermal has always been a situation that we never liked. We thought it was sacrilegious to drill holes in sacred places, or you don't throw rubbish on a Catholic altar. Yeah, you know, I think that the state is always supposed to be responsible for us Hawaiian people. I mean, we do pay taxes, and I don't see how or where we get representation from the state. The state of Hawaii is a perfect example to me about how they treat natives of the land that the government has no obligation or no treaty. We don't have what American Indians have, anything written down on how you treat a race. So the state takes it upon themselves to treat us the way they feel. They regulate our Hawaiian beliefs and movement and land use the way they feel it should be. I mean, I thought that slave owners did that to slaves. I didn't know that government do that to people, especially the people, the host people. We in Hawaii today, after a couple hundred years of Western introduction, and maybe the world should know that we are now being run by migrant people. We're being run, this state, by second-generation immigrants that ignore our rights. They didn't come for them. They didn't want to be Hawaiians. They came to be this new people in a new world. So now we see the situation we're in as Hawaiians being judged and directed by non-Hawaiians on what and how we should think and be as Hawaiian people. I just think it's very racist, and people got to know that, yes, we feel for immigrants, but this is the results of what immigrants do after 2 generations of America the Beautiful. This is how we're being treated. You know, we grow up and go to school with all these people that are 3rd generation or 2nd generation migrants, and they're not going to say they're ignorant about Hawaiians and what we're all about. They grew up with us. And to become political leaders today and ignore who we were, I mean, it's very obvious. If we're the worst if we're the worst race with all those social diseases and problems, then whoever was pulling the button or pushing the button or dictating my life as a Hawaiian, you could say your fault. I blame you. I blame you for being neglectful to who I am just out of human courtesy. So, where do I go from here? All we have left, I guess, with our last breath is to keep saying what I'm saying. Everybody's got to know. And if we shut up and say nothing and go with the flow, so they say, we'll never fix these social problems of Hawaiians. We'll never fix a lot of traditional things that we grew up with. And every country in this world still hang on to traditions. And there's no extra Hawaii floating around where you go get Hawaiians and replace our resources as well as our people. No more. We're it. So why aren't they so protective of us being the last race in these islands, because there's no extra Hawaii someplace, that we're not important? That's what I mean about environmental people. You know, they love science, but they don't love us. Like we didn't have science. We don't know what's going on. You know, we lived here from 450 AD. That's the oldest bones they found. So I think from 450 AD to today, we knew what we're doing and we've made adjustments to it. And in that adjustments, there was a strong sense and a strong will to have spirituality. And I think that's about all we got left is our inside, our soul, to keep us, I would say, grounded, or the foundations of who we are. They've done their best to alter our minds, alter our environment, alter our way of life. And I think all we have left is our soul, and I think that's important to keep, defend for our future.